He then commenced a rambling discourse and begged to know if there was no avoiding his fate, promising to give up all his papers, to go to any part of the world we might send him, and there reside, seeking to have no communication with America, and living a different life from that he had formerly pursued, by which I understood that he would maintain his Masonic obligations. Just as I was about to reply to him, my comrades came to the door of the magazine, which they opened, and beckoned me to come to them, which I did. They informed me that they had procured a boat and a number of heavy weights, and that everything was ready on their part, and demanded to know if Morgan himself was prepared. Before I could answer, Morgan commenced shouting, as if in the hope of obtaining assistance. "By God," said one of our number, "that must be stopped, or we may yet all be discovered." So saying, he entered the magazine, followed by myself, and striding up to Morgan, he bade them cease that useless alarm, which avail him nothing, for that die he must, if we had to kill him where he stood. If he cowed by the fierceness of this demonstration, Morgan stopped shouting, and again began remonstrating against our conduct, which he declared to be wholly unjustifiable, even if he had violated his Masonic obligations, for Masons had no right to put men to death. He was again told that all remonstrances were idle, and that he should prepare himself for death, otherwise he would have to die without making his peace. From this moment, and as if his nature revolted against the oppression of which he was the object, his bearing underwent a change. He became more firm and disdained to make further appeals for mercy for himself. But the feelings of the husband and the father were still strong within him, and he humbled himself so far as to plead in behalf of his family. He begged that some permanent provision might be made for them, and above all things implored us to communicate his fate to his wife. He requested that one of us would write a letter to his wife, making her acquainted with the facts connected with his death, in order that her mind might be relieved from the horrors of uncertainty. As we saw no harm in making this promise, which of course we had no idea of keeping, we pledged ourselves to comply with his request, and assured him that his family should not be permitted to suffer from poverty. We then told him that we would leave him alone for a half an hour, at the end of which time we would expect to find him prepared to meet his inevitable fate. He merely bowed by way of reply. Retiring from the room, we stationed ourselves near the door and endeavored to prevent reflection by conversation, carried on in a low tone. But it was a vain. Every effort was a failure, and at last a gloomy silence fell over us, which none ventured to disturb. How Morgan passed the time I cannot say. Everything was quiet as the tomb within. As he was chained and handcuffed, he could not move without our hearing him, and not the faintest sound fell upon our ears, which were so painfully open to everything, that I verily believe the falling of a leaf in our midst would have caused us to start with terror. Most probably he indulged in that rapid reflection which is always caused by the uncertainty of the fast approach of death, and his whole life, with its mingled pictures of good and ill, passed before his fervid vision. Perhaps he prayed, not only for himself and his family, but for his murderers. I cannot dwell upon the subject, for even at the distance of time appeals the memory. The time having expired, we entered the magazine and found Morgan ready to receive us. He made no remonstrances, no offered any resistance, his demeanor and acts being in all respect those of a man who has nerved himself boldly to meet a certain doom. We bound his hands behind him and placed a gag in his mouth. One of our number marched a few yards in advance and was followed by myself and the other associate between whom walked Morgan, as we had hold of one of his arms above the elbow. A short time brought us to where the boat had been placed, and we all entered it, Morgan being placed in the bows with myself alongside of him. My comrades took the oars, and the boat was rapidly forced out into the river. The night was pitch dark, and we could scarcely see a yard before us, and therefore was the time admirably adapted to our hellish purpose. Having arrived at a place sufficiently removed from the land, the rowers ceased from their labors, and my particular duty now commenced. In the bottom of the boat lay a number of heavy weights, all tied together by a strong cord that had been carried through the ring of each weight so that they formed one mass. From the center of the cord by which they were joined proceeded another cord of equal strength and several yards in length. This cord I took in my hand and fastened around the body of Morgan, just above his hips, using all my skill to make it fast so that it would hold. Then in a whisper I bade the unhappy men to stand up, and after a momentary hesitation they complied with the order. He stood close to the head of the boat, and there was just enough of the rope from his person to the weights to prevent any strain while he was standing. I requested one of my associates to assist me in lifting the weights from the bottom of the side of the boat, while the other steadied her from the stern. This was done, and Morgan was standing with his back toward me and apparently looking into the water. I approached him and gave him a strong push with both my hands, which were placed in the middle of his back. He fell forward, carrying the weights with him, and the waters closed over the mass. We remained quiet for the space of 2 or 3 minutes, when my companions, without saying a word, resumed their places and rowed the boat to the place from which they had taken it. We then jumped ashore, and exchanging pressures of the band, separated without a word. I made my way home with all dispatch, trembling at every sound, and dreading at each moment that I should meet someone who might recognize me, notwithstanding the blackness of darkness in which the earth was enshrouded. So great were my fears for my personal safety that I did not reflect on the villainy in which I had been engaged, by which a fellow creature had been deprived of life and a family bereft of its protector. It was not until I had managed to reach my bedroom without falling in with anyone that reflection came, and from that hour that I must date the commencement of those torments which have never since left me. I threw myself on my bed, but sleep would not visit me. I was in a state of nervous excitement and began to experience the gnawings of a worm that never dies, and to feel the intensity of the fire that is never quenched. At the earliest dawn I rose and went out and wandered forth among the forests, tortured by remorse, and cursing the folly that had led me to imbrue my hands in Morgan's blood. I continued in the vicinity, but at last I determined to go into the States for the purpose of getting away from the scene of my crime. I proceeded to that part of New York in which the Anti-Masonic excitement originated, and was apparently calm spectator of the evils that grew out of the intense and just indignation of a people stirred by their innermost souls by the occurrence of a mysterious crime that had baffled the law, and whose perpetrators seemed to be as much above the reach of ordinary human power as were the members of the once terrible secret tribunal of Germany. I remained there for a considerable length of time as if fascinated, and I not only attended anti-Masonic meetings, but likewise many of the trials that grew out of the Morgan outrage. The excited state of the public mind was in unison with my own feelings, which could not settle down into a condition of calmness. No man in that part of the world was acquainted with the part I had played in the murder of Morgan, for it may easily be believed that I would not take anyone into my confidence, and of those who had been concerned in the affair with me, either in consultation or action, none resided near to my then place of abode. Of my fellow executioners, both had absented themselves from their homes within a very short space of time after that fatal night. nor have I any reason for suppressing that either of them ever communicated the fact of my having been united with them in the deed of murder to third parties. If it should be asked why I did not unburthen my mind to brother Masons, my reply is that, in the first place, I thought I had no right to render them accessories to my crime, as by such confidence they would, in a certain case, in a certain sense, have become. And when I saw Masons who for a long time had breasted the storm, leaving and undermining the order either from conscientious or interested motives, it occurred to me that I should endanger my life by taking any man into my confidence, thus being compelled to retain the dread secret in my bosom. My existence became to the last degree miserable, and my health so declined that I began to fear that I should be called upon to render an account to a greater power than that of any earthly tribunal, and from those scrutiny no secret could be concealed. Though my life was a burthen, I did not the less dread death, for I could not bring my mind to the belief that with the grave there comes annihilation and accountability ceases. I shunned society and passed all the hours that were at my command in solitude, a change having come over my thoughts, and as at first I sought all public places and crowds were my delight, now the forest was better to me than the street, and the presence of men my abhorrence. It seemed to me as if my secret were known to all men, and that for reasons to them good, they allowed of the postponement of my certain punishment. I found I could not walk erect, nor obtain rest, nor find pleasure in any of those pursuits in which the innocent pass their hours of leisure, and I might have been addressed in the words of the greatest poets. What isn't that takes from thee thy comfort, pleasure, and thy golden sleep? Why dost thou bend thine eyes upon the earth, and start so often when thou sittest alone? Why hast thou lost the fresh blood in thy cheek? Oh, what portents are these? After remaining in western New York between 2 and 3 years, it occurred to me that change of scene might tend to relieve my mind from the weight that oppressed it. I proceeded to one of the new territories where I resided for a considerable length of time, seeking refuge from thought and reflection on the hazards and discomforts of a frontier life. But it was all of no avail. Go where I would or do what I would, it was impossible for me to throw off the consciousness of time. It was the mark of Cain that was upon me, the curse of the first murderer on my soul. The blood stain was on my hands that could not be washed out. The avenger of blood seemed ever on my track. The remonstrances of my victim fell upon my ear at all times and in every place. I heard them in calm and amid the storm. They whispered to me among the grass of the prairies and through the leaves of the forest. Neither change of place nor change of pursuit brought me to consolation or rest. It mattered not whether I was among crowds of men or in the silence of some wood that never before had been penetrated by civilized man. The voice of the avenger was ever sounding in my ear and giving me to know the truth of the declaration that mischief shall haunt the violent man.